My name is Amy Fawn, and I am chair of the Writing and Literature program at CCA, and I am very happy to be moderating WordCraft. In our everyday lives, we take words for granted. We abuse them, misuse them, misinterpret them, and often rescind them altogether. We say what we don't mean what we say. So it is easy to forget that these words do more than simply communicate or manipulate, to express affection, comfort, disgust, hate. It is easy to do this. As children, we were fed strings of words that were meant to connect us with the older human beings towering over us, to tell them what we want. But this changes once we begin to read books, listen to music, and understand that there are people out there who can use these words to create art. This is the kind of art that we can carry with us, whisper under our breaths, and can recall when it is uttered in almost any context. Words are portable that way, unforgettable, influential, staying with us forever. We understand this world through the words we use with each other. We use words to experience our lives, to connect with each other, to make sense of what is happening inside and outside of ourselves, to give voice to the disenfranchised, to empower, to begin revolutions. Writers, therefore, are the intermediaries, providing beautiful, haunting combinations that establish and celebrate the human connection. For writers, words do say everything, and our two writers today will help demonstrate that. Our first presenter is Patricia Powell. Patricia Powell was born in Jamaica and immigrated to the US in the early 80s. And so the issue of migration, the movement between countries, between states of being, between physical and non-physical realms, between gender identities, this movement between borders, this desire in us for change, perhaps even transformation, has been a recurring theme in her work. Powell is the author of Me, Dying Trial, A Small Gathering of Bones, The Pagoda, and The Fullness of Everything. Excerpts from her novel have been widely anthologized, and she has lectured and led creative writing workshops in literary venues, both nationally and internationally. In 1993, Patricia Powell was a finalist for Granta's Best of Young American Novelists Award. Among other prizes, she is the recipient of a PEN Discovery Award, the Publishing Triangle's Farrell Grumley Award, and the Lila Wallace Reader's Digest Writers Award. Powell is currently at work on a memoir and is Associate Professor of English at Mills College. Paul Flores is a published poet, performance artist, playwright, and spoken word artist. His work explores the intersection of urban culture, hip-hop, and transnational identity. He spent much of his youth between Tijuana and San Diego, developing a border consciousness, and his PEN Award-winning novel, Along the Border Lies, reflects this experience. Flores' most recent one-person show, You're Gonna Cry, sold out its premiere weekend at Dance Mission Theater in February 2011. His play, Representa, toured to 17 cities, including New York, and other performance projects have taken him from HBO's Deaf Poetry to Cuba, Mexico, and El Salvador. His new play, Placas, is about Central American immigrants and tattoo removal. Flores also produces independent events and performs throughout the U.S. He manages the Latino Men and Boys program, funded by the California Endowment, at the Unity Council in East Oakland. He also teaches hip-hop theater and spoken word at the University of San Francisco. We will first welcome Patricia and then Paul. Thank you.
There's this Buddhist saying that goes, that which we seek is causing us to seek. And I've often wondered if this means that our stories choose us to unearth, unerase, and unbury them. Is that why we write certain ones over and over again? Why we're haunted by others that refuse to be written down? Why is it that some stories seem almost prophetic when we look back at them later on? Why do certain ones come when they do and not others? And why do they take the particular shapes they demand of us? If writing is a language, and language is desire and longing and suffering and great passion and hope and nuances of passion, then how or what might our syntax reflect about desire or states of desire or hope or despair or fury, or what might our language, what might our characters or our formal assumptions, our paragraphs, our dashes, our hyphens tell us? What might breath tell us about states of desire and about suffering and truth? So I've been studying energy medicine for the last 15 years or so, and I've also been studying shamanism, and I've been trying to find a way to bring these two parts together, the sort of energy work and creative writing. And I don't just want to write about healing. I want the text that I produce, to be a sort of breathing, living template, this object that is vibrating with all kinds of possibilities for the reader and also for the characters. And so in my most recent novel, The Fullness of Everything, I wanted the novel to work on many levels. Of course, on a formal level, on the level of story, on the level of language. I wanted it to certainly have its aesthetic appeal, but I also wanted it to be, I also wrote it in a language, in a way where the language was peeled back, and the particular energetic vibrations I was holding for the characters, say, loving kindness, for example, that sensibility would also resonate for the reader. Another experiment that I've been trying out is with a memoir that I'm also writing. And it's about my work as a shaman and journeying to alternate realms. And in journeying, the shaman goes into an altered state and goes to the shamanic realm to retrieve medicine for healing certain afflictions, for example. And so as I've been writing these journeys and thinking about and playing with and feeling into the possibility of transporting the reader on a journey as well, so that the experience can be a visceral and fully embodied one for the reader, and not only just a mental exercise, though it can be that as well if you choose. So I've been thinking about these various ways of crafting texts that go beyond language and beyond sound and other sort of formal structures, and having the text operate on a level of energy and consciousness. But I don't know yet how these experiments are going. The novel I'm going to read from today is a more conventional text. It doesn't attempt to do any of those things that I've been experimenting with recently. It's an older book. It's fairly conventional in form, but it was a book in which I tried to sort of experiment with language, with wordsmithing. The novel is called The Pagoda. It's a novel about Chinese immigration to Jamaica in the 19th century. And it's a historical novel, and in particular, it follows the main character, Lo. And Lo is passing Lo is female and is passing as a male shopkeeper in rural Jamaica. And I'll just say a little bit about the novel and a little bit about the sort of experiments with language, though in truth, there are no experiments at all. They're not experiments, but for me, they were. So the desire, if writing is language and language is desire and longing and so forth, the desire in the pagoda is ultimately for the character to find home, to have the sense of belonging, to settle into community and into skin. And Lo, the main character, the Chinese woman who's passing as a male shopkeeper, wants order and normalcy and conventionality. She wants to fit in. She wants to be able to pass. And as a result, the form of the novel is not restless at all. There's nothing sort of distilled or compressed or alternative about it. It is very straightforward. The yearning, however, this yearning for home, or this need to belong, the sense of loss of that other home, the disappointment, the confusion, the fears even of being in this new land. All these are packed into the language, hence the fullness of it, the richness of it, the voluptuousness. Musings, dreams, plans, unarticulated and articulated desires, all these are also in the language and in each line and paragraph, bunching up between even those things not said. So there's a record of an experience, and there's a drama of the language. And there's a language that's speaking to the character's hunger. And there's also music in the language, the symphony resting on the words, slowing them and turning them ever so slightly. There are patterns that are repeating and somersaulting. And then there's the preoccupation with geography and with landscape. There's the preoccupation with ownership of land and with things and with buildings and spaces and documents. And there's a preoccupation with precision and with details. There were also several questions I was asking as I was writing the book, and also looking to the interior logic of the text to not only answer them, but to also embody them in a nuanced way. So there were questions about historicity and about race and class and gender and sexuality and immigration and identity. So, for example, a question that worried me as I wrote, how does history get written about, and from whose point of view? And how do you write about the other in a way that nuances subjectivity? And is there really an other? Or are we simply writing about those aspects of the self with which we are uncomfortable, those uncharted, unknown portions? There is also the issue of gender and what pronoun to use. Lo is passing as a male shopkeeper. I did not want to use, when I was writing this book in the 90s, I was still operating under the binary of he and she. I wasn't aware of all the options that are available now. And so I didn't want to use she or he in the way that Virginia Woolf does in Orlando, which is to change the pronoun once the true gender identity of the character is revealed to the reader. But Lo, who has been passing since she was a girl, is now in her 50s when the reader meets her for the first time. And so she's not only male by appearance, she's set up her life with her wife and her daughter to sort of carry on this masquerade of passing. So there's also the question of authenticity, how to portray a convincing female Chinese narrator, how to portray a convincing female Chinese narrator posing as male. And then ultimately, because it is a novel of becoming, or perhaps unbecoming, Lo's desire is to find an authentic self, one devoid of the markings and trappings of gender, if that is at all possible. But certainly these were some of the questions that informed the text. And so now I'll just read a little piece from the Pagoda. And Lo is referred to as he throughout the book, even though very early on in the novel the reader comes to realize that Lo is not male but female. And Lo has a shop the Chinese immigrated to the Caribbean in the 19th century. They came right after slavery. And so Lo lives in a small rural community that is primarily Black. And this community, slavery has just ended, so things are difficult. And there's a lot of poverty. Anyway, she has this little shop. And when the novel opens, the shop has been burnt to the ground. And so this destruction really leads to her unraveling and in a way to finding self. So this section that I'm reading, Lo returns to the shop, to her competitor's shop for the first time. Her competitor is Miss Cora. She has a shop similar to the one that Lo had, and after many weeks of not returning, after many weeks of feeling so completely betrayed by these people, Lo goes back. One night, when there was no sleep to be had, no dreams to disguise his despair, no dreams to ease the whirlpool of thoughts, no dreams to reveal his fear. Oh, I forgot one little bit. There's Omar, and Omar is the housekeeper's son, and the housekeeper. So Lo lives in this house with Miss Sylvie, and the housekeeper, and the housekeeper's son is Omar, and Omar and Lo, they don't quite get along, and Omar has threatened Lo with blackmail. Omar has threatened to tell the villagers that Lo is not male as they think, but female. So this is a little perturbing for Lo. One night, when there was no sleep to be had, no dreams to disguise his despair, no dreams to ease the whirlpool of thoughts, to relieve his fear of the horror that was to unfold when Omar decided to reveal his plan to get the land, Lo leapt out of bed and hauled on his clothes and shoes parked at the door and was swinging down the steep stone steps of the veranda and into the blinding dark, picking out his way past the burnt-out ruins of his shop where he had not been since the devastation. The rain squalled into his hat, and the light breeze rustled the fuzz on his neck, and he stepped quickly, wanting to reach in time before the men returned to their homes and the comfort of wives and lovers. Part of the way he ran, hoping not to fall, and the smell of fields and the moist, loamy earth suffused with the burning remains of his shop rushed at him, and the cave of his stomach trembled again, just remembering. The night was black, and the pupils of his eyes picked out needles of light spiraling from Miss Cora's shop, and he could hear bursts of laughter. He walked slowly again to ease the boom-boom of his chest, to remove the flush from his cheeks, to calm the flutter, and he hoped with all his might that Omar had not gotten there ahead of him. It was the shop belonging to his main competitor, Miss Cora, who was a shrewd businesswoman and not so prone to trusting goods on credit. He had never set foot in her shop, but it was in her little stone church, hot and choked with people, that Elizabeth, his daughter, was christened. He paused in the entrance of her shop, adjusting his eyes to the yellow beams of light glowing from the lamps. It was a Tuesday night, and Miss Cora was there, leaned up at the counter, cradling her jaw and peering into the darkness. Inching closer, Lo could separate the cry of insects from the timbre of voices, and he could recognize the bursts of laughter. And he realized now that he had heard these very same jokes before, with the same interjections and snorts. He knew exactly what Mas Wali would say next, and that Reagan wouldn't respond to the jab until he had asked for another shot of rum. He knew that Spratt's bitterness over the woman that had run off would erupt. He swallowed bitterly. To them, nothing had happened. Their lives had not come to a complete standstill with the ground rotting away underfoot. The disruption had not eaten away at them and left them with wretched nights. The proof was here in the circular lines of stories that were the same he had heard every night for 30 years. For him, though, for him it had stopped. Now he had nothing. They had burnt it down, left him with nothing. But their lives. Suddenly he was enraged. Suddenly he shook with the feelings. Suddenly his chest burned with the fever of his hate, and he turned on his heels, except that one of the men must have seen him, for someone grabbed his arm and another a fist of shirt. "Is that you, Mr. Lo?" "My God, Mr. Lo." He heard the surprise in their voices, the pause. Bring him come. That was Miss Cora in a loud and commanding tone of voice. Come, clear the counter, bring him. Miss Cora again. Lo, My God, man, that was Jake, with no teeth at all in his mouth, so his words whistled. Mr. Lowe, they held on to him. They pulled him to their chest. His nostrils brushed up against armpits, rubbed up against the sharp cloth of their starched shirts, rubbed up against their tight, wiry limbs. My God, Mr. Lowe. He felt arms around his neck, wrapping his shoulders and chest, beating, smoothing his cheeks, and he knew Omar had not struck yet. Bring him, Miss Cora again with a sharp voice. And enough of this blasted hug. Bring the man. He heard the clink of glasses on counter, heard the rip and twist of new bottle cap, heard the pouring measure of liquid into glasses, smelled the razor cut of rum. Come, Miss Cora again. They must have lifted him off his feet, for he was suspended. There was no ground, and he was face to face with the cobwebs in the corner of the wall, face to face with the dusty tops of glass case, oil drum, the shiny middle of heads. He was deafened by the thunderous roar of men. And he was face to face with Miss Cora at the counter, and she grinned, and he saw that her eyes behind the glasses were kind, and that her wig of straight and fine yellow hair, lightly dusted with flour, was crooked on her head, and he could see the cottony curls of her own hair creeping out near her ears, and he saw her shuddering chins, her arms swinging, her fingers twinkling, smelled again the horse sweat of the men that had burnt down his shop, the rum smell, the carbolic soap smell, the smell of manure and of wood shaving, the smell of grass, the smell of cane juice, the smell of blood on the men who were arsonists. Drink up now, Miss Cora again with a mouth full of grinning gaudy teeth. And suddenly the shop was crowded with toasted men, men with firm brown arms holding up in the air glasses of rum, men who had burnt down his shop, men who still owed him 30, 40 pounds, though once in a while a wife came up to the house on a Sunday evening to drop off a few shillings, men with mirth, men with merriment. They dropped him to his feet. Lowe put the glass to his lips, and the fire blooded his face at once and smarted his eyes and pounded so hard in his belly he felt his knees go wobbly, and Miss Cora burst out into a spiraling laughter that chopped up the night. Drink up, man, Lowe, drink up. And she polished off 2 more glasses and was pouring a 4th round again for herself and the others, and Lowe said to them in a voice moist with confusion, for maybe it wasn't them, maybe they hadn't burned it down. Thank you.
My name's Paul Flores. How are you guys doing today? Beautiful Sunday in San Francisco. Give San Francisco a round of applause because it's beautiful here. I'm a performer, a spoken word artist, and I'm going to talk a little bit today. I'm going to show you what I do first, and then I'm going to get a little bit into wordsmithing, or at least giving you an idea of my craft in relationship to my influences and how those influences kind of represent a generational influence in literary performance, oral tradition as it is practiced now. Okay, so I have been in San Francisco for about 16 years, 17 years, and I'm very much connected to the Mission District as far as its artist, Latino artist community and traditions that represent that community, and have been connected for a while. And so I'm going to read this first piece just so you get an idea of the different styles of work I do, but also kind of to give you a social context for where my pieces come from. So this piece is called Crowbar Thing, and I'll read this little intro that it has. At the height of the San Francisco.com boom, Peter Glickstern, owner of the popular Liquid Bar on 16th Street, beat and seriously injured 3 Latino immigrants with a crowbar who had been drinking too much at his club. The event ignited feelings of violence and racism attached to the gentrification of the Mission, especially after Glickstern was cleared of all charges. Can I ask you a question? Are you doing that crowbar thing? Liquid thing? 16th Street corridor crawl thing? That grimy thing? That thing about being hip without trying too hard? That whole ironic thing? About telling him, telling her, telling us, telling them that we must clean up the mission because cool people need a cool place to drink thing. A looking for a good time thing. And I'm tired of the marina thing, a Polaroid, postcard, crackhead, and prostitute thing, a hipsters in the dicey barrio thing. And it's just like the Lower East Side thing, graffiti on the front door, hot music and cool DJs thing, an opportunistic, an optimistic thing, because can't you see the benefit of more green space and bike lane thing? Besides, how could gentrification be violent if artists started it? Are you doing that crowbar thing? The cash in your Oracle stock and buy a bar in the mission thing? The protect your investment even if it means displacement thing? The it's not personal, strictly business thing? The just trying to live the American dream thing? The white man's burden thing? The new sheriff in town thing? The show 'em your gun thing? The violence and destitution, it's so sexy thing? The civilize the savages thing? The vigilante thing? The cross and the crowbar thing? The Arnold Schwarzenegger thing? Are you doing the crowbar thing? That English only thing? That switch to la migra when you can't stand your Latino clients or employees thing? That drug dealers, prostitutes, Mexicans, they're all the same thing? The electronic hate mail thing? That reverse racism thing? That híjole thing? That no mames way thing? That que tú esperabas way thing? That Mexican beer is better at room temperature thing? That Glickstern, club hopping, immigrant crowbar bashing thing? Are you doing that crowbar thing? Doing the forget about the Centro del Pueblo thing? Doing the volunteer at the pirate store instead thing? Doing the post-Chicano thing because I'm not political, I'm an artist thing? Doing the more green space thing because murals don't prevent violence thing? Doing the bike lane thing because lowriders aren't ecologically beneficial thing? Doing the save the whales things because my grandparents graduated from Berkeley thing? Doing the indie rock thing because hip-hop, it's so misogynistic now thing? Doing the retro 80s thing because I got bigger fish to fry and I gotta get mine thing? Doing the righteous thing because sometimes immigrants deserve to get beat in the head with a crowbar thing? Besides, how could gentrification be violent if artists started it? Note the irony in the piece. This next one is more about specifically ethnic identity, traditions, and generational issues, but more specifically related to language, wordsmithing in multiple languages, called Spanglish. Kimbara, kimbaro. Kimbara, kimbaro. Kimbara, 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 kumba, kimbamba. Kimbara, kimbara, kumba, kimbamba. Kimbara, kimbara, kumba, kimbamba. Kimbara, kimbara, kumba, kimbamba. Yeah, mama, yeah, mama. Yeah, mama, yeah, mama. Kimbara, kimbara, kumba, kimbamba. Kimbara, kimbara, kumba, kimbamba. Kimbara, kimbara, kumba, kimbamba. Kimbara, kimbara, kumba, kimbamba. Yeah, mama, yeah, mama. Eh, mama, eh, mama. I unearth my mother's tongue and hold it in my hand like a flopping fish, a gleaming survivor. I remember my first dance around the kitchen table. Benny Moré was singing on Mexican radio. Castellano, que bueno, baila usted. Castellano, que bueno, baila usted. The double meaning at play. Castellano was the original name for Spanish. My grandmother was dancing. She said, agárrame por los hips. I did. She led, and my first movement was Spanglish. It's got nothing to do with my broad back or my ability to endure hard labor. I'm not an unusual Mexican for being intelligent. My social consciousness is complex. Out of necessity, we moved from one nation to another, from one language to another, from one identity to another. And when I found my lover, well, she reminded me of my mother, because Spanglish people recognize the Spanglish experience in each other. So I roll my R's like roles. Cinco con guacamole. I blow lights out on the border, shine them on mi lenguaje. I swim in this cultural molasses. If I'm pure anything, homie, soy puro Spanglish. More than a simple combination of idioms. This reality we witness and we create. My grandmother never learned to speak proper English, but she taught me how to dance on the hyphen between Mexican, Cuban, American, between roots and assimilation, between congas y trompetas, between corn and harina, until it was all one movement. Castellano que bueno, baila usted, the double meaning at play. When everything is multicultural, but America remains monolingual. I mean, if everybody loves to wrap their favorite condiments in a tortilla, why don't they call it a burrito? Instead of Chicano or Latino, they refer to us as those people. Those people are always fighting. Those people are always drinking. Those people are always having so many babies. Those people can't even speak English right. See, we built a tolerance for ignorance, but it's the myth of superiority that I can't stomach. From Ricky Ricardo to Richie Valens to Ricky Martin, we want to be accepted, but we're too brown for whites and too raro for real Mexicans. I mean, even Selena had to learn traditional Mexican music when racist Texans rejected her rock and roll. Spanglish is unorthodox. No one can understand us but us, outcast mestizos con gris de gallo pinto, moro con cristiano, gallo pinto con huevo. Buenas noches, criollo. Spanglish is the echo from my grandmother's kitchen. My interpretation of a reality that ignores our contributions. Spanglish is what I do to reflect my mix, but this ain't no new marketing gimmick, no new stereotype. Mixing cultures can be hazardous when reality is black or white. Castellano que bueno, baila usted, the double meaning at play. So I roll my R's like roles, cinco con guacamole. I blow lights out on the border, shine them on mi lenguaje. I swim in this cultural molasses. If I'm pure anything, homie, soy puro Spanglish. This is my novel called Along the Border Lies that was mentioned in my bio. It's about what changes happened at the border between Mexico and California that pretty much preceded, set the groundwork for what we have now, these narco wars. This takes place more like in 93, 94, 95, 96, when narco culture really started to penetrate the border. And this is kind of about my experience growing up there. That's where I was born and raised. This is my CD, if you want to kind of understand on a more visceral level the type of work I do. It's called Chicano Messengers of Spoken Word. Features myself and two other national Chicano spoken word artists, but we'll peep that later. This last piece I'm going to do is called Brown Dreams. And I want to be sure kind of to give you an idea, a little pretext to this piece. A lot of people, when they've heard this piece, because it's been played I don't know how many times, they think that this is about illegal immigration. And yes, illegal immigration and undocumented immigrants, there's a big issue in our community and in our culture today, but this piece is about a policy. All right, the United States has a policy around recruiting immigrants to serve in the military. It's called, what they have it now is this issue called posthumous citizenship, that an immigrant can serve in the military. And if this immigrant goes through 4 years of military service and gets discharged with an honorable discharge, they will receive or be on the path to citizenship. If this immigrant dies in the process of service, they are also given citizenship. Posthumous citizenship. It's basically this this person served the United States honorably, and here's this citizenship paper along on top of a folded flag. The thing about this is that that's all that's offered a dead immigrant soldier, instead of the correct benefits that any other soldier would get when they die. Their family gets death benefits, health benefits for their family. This does not get given to this immigrant's family. Nothing gets given to this immigrant. In fact, it's a gamble if you're an immigrant to join the military for the purpose of becoming a citizen, because you might not get anything out of it. So this is about that policy of luring immigrants to join the military with possible citizenship. That's called Brown Dreams. This is a true story about a brown dream sinking to the bottom of the Tigris Euphrates. This is a brown dream. It was Francisco's last night out with his friends. The three of them on their way to see the latest sci-fi movie. They were driving, a stereo jockeying the latest top 40 rapper because that was all he listened to. But it didn't matter. Music was only part of the setting and not the motivation for late-night brainstorms about how to make money or how to escape the feeling of being left out of a dream. So many painted red, white, and blue. But his dream was brown. Brown as his skin. Brown and impure. Brown as Eve's apple after she took the first bite. Brown as the everlasting blur of English, African, and Indian moving through the forest of this continent 400 years ago, before it was known as destiny, before he'd ever heard the word immigrants, beaner, spick, stupid, dirty Mexican. He's 18. He's in San Diego, Topeka, Oklahoma, San Antonio, Cleveland, San Francisco, California. He wants a piece of the American dream. Francisco wanted a college degree. He wanted to be a professional, an FBI agent, right? Because those were the jobs that had the most power. If he could have been a rock star or a superhero, there would have been no need to enlist. But he had to be a U.S. citizen if he was going to make a living like them. The Army recruiter at his high school told him if he served in the military, he could automatically become a U.S. citizen. After 4 years' duty and an honorable discharge, there would be plenty of money left over for him to continue his education at a good institution. Or he could take his technical skills as a tank operator or small weapons expertise and apply those to a civilian job. Yeah, it was exciting. Brown boy who wasn't even a citizen, who had barely been a resident 5 years, who didn't know much about education, was now willing to die to become a student. 1 year later, they were fighting in Iraq. Francisco heard it was the second time the president had invaded this nation. They were driving in the desert. They were taking fire, swerving. The tank lost control and headed straight into the river. As Francisco's lungs filled up with water, he remembered his last night out with his friends. How his mother had wanted to cook dinner for him. But he didn't want to spend another hour in that cramped apartment where she cooked for 6 of his brothers, their 2 uncles and their compadres. Instead, Francisco invited Jose and Diego out to the movies because that's what Americans did. Now his soul is an ancestor in the Euphrates. Chicano blood, returning to the Garden of Eden by way of the U.S. Army. Same way it had come. Only now he would finally receive something he had been promised, an officially sealed envelope on top of old glory. Citizenship had never been earned so graciously, even if it comes posthumously. Why don't they extend it to the victim's family? You see, the reality of the American dream is dirty. Why should Chicanos have to die to earn the approval of this society? This is a brown dream. Brown as gasoline. Brown as coyotes. Brown as blood-soaked sands of Iraq and on the ranches of Arizona border vigilantes. Brown as the Rio Grande, the Mississippi. Brown as affirmative action in the military, but not the university. This is a brown dream. connection between where spoken word comes from as far as its influences. And I'm going to give you this, Ginsberg's Howl. You guys know this piece? Howl is written in the 50s while Ginsberg is in San Francisco. And I want you to specifically look at how it's divided into 1, 2, 3 parts. Then the fourth one is the footnote. That's the holy, holy, holy piece. Ginsberg wrote his piece basically in 3 parts. The first part being a lament for the lambs, those victims of his generation, of which Carl Solomon was. Carl Solomon was a man he met while in a mental institution who was lobotomized. The lambs, right? And if you look at who they are, who chained themselves to subways, who sank all night in submarine light of Bixfords, who talked continuously, who a lost battalion, whose intellect disgorged in total recall, who vanished into nowhere, who loaned it through the streets, right? Folks who were basically taken advantage of by the culture at the time, who he named the Moloch. Do you guys know who the Moloch was? Part 2 is about the Moloch of society, the ancient Hebrew monster that ate children. All right, the Moloch is capitalistic industrial society. Look how long the line is. Look how many exclamation points there are. But look how long the line is. The line is so long because the idea was to lose breath, to perform the line until you were out of breath. That was the idea. And actually, the first time Ginsberg performed this, he would perform it all in, as much as he could in one breath, and he would actually pass out. He would get drunk with wine, but then pass out while he was performing it. So part 2 is the Moloch. Part 3 is showing love to the lamb and celebrating that victim's struggle. The refrains, I'm with you in Rockland, right? The refrains, Moloch. The refrains, who. The long line, the refrain, the reference to social justice and identifying with victims. Things that are very prominent in spoken word today. The generational issue of fighting against those struggles that a generation is going through in relationship to conformity of the 50s, right? Ginsberg was sent to the hospital because his parents thought something was wrong with him because he wasn't doing well in school. And they didn't want to say, we're sending you there because you're gay, which is really what it was. They had interned him because he was gay. Okay, one more minute. Compare this to my large influence, which is Saul Williams, today's spoken word kind of king. This book, The Dead Sea Scrolls, is compared to the Red Sea Scrolls, the lost writings of hip-hop. He begins this piece with a dedication that's repeated over and over again. This book is dedicated to those who prayed for it, who saw it before it was here, who sensed it from the beginning, right? If you go down a little bit, the refrain, this book is dedicated, goes over and over again. It's all unbroken, but there's a part in here where he basically names who he's dedicating it to, and they are more or less the victims also. And I just kind of wanted to show you the language is different. But if I could just find that part. I'm not seeing it. Anyway, Saul Williams is the person who unites hip-hop and the generational issues the hip-hop generation faces to spoken word. And I basically want to kind of give you an idea of how we have from the 50s to now, and how spoken word itself is a literary form that has literary forms. And so if I was able to find the spot, I wasn't able to, where he names who the victims are. He talks about people who shot up the high school dances, the people who dropped out of high school, the folks who, he calls them floozies, the girls who were too easy in school and never got no real love. So the whole idea of naming who the victims are, putting it in this kind of repetitive, using the repetitive frame and an unbroken line. These are things that you see that are being used from Ginsberg's time all the way up to now, naming the generational issues that we are seeing now as the hip-hop generation versus something like the beat generation. So I just wanted to show you that I find my work kind of in between these two, in between Ginsberg's forms and what we're using now in hip hop through Saul Williams' forms. And sorry I don't have more time to talk about it, but thank you.
Perhaps we could start, if both of you could address how you became interested in language as a medium for you to express your ideas and express the concerns you have.
I'll go. I started writing pretty early in college, even before that, but it was in graduate school, I think, when I went to Brown, and there's real emphasis on experiments in language there, innovation. So, of course, you can't leave that program without being sort of saturated by all of that stuff. So, but it was great. Taking classes with those language poets and working with writers like Carol Maso and Keith Waldroff, and just reading all these texts, Gertrude Stein and Nathalie Sarraute and Marguerite Duras. You were really sort of embedded in this business of language. I thought what was really interesting too is when I arrived at Brown, I was in a workshop with my classmates, and we would exchange stories, and we had no idea how to read each other's work because we were such an eclectic bunch that we had no language to critique what we were reading. And so, of course, we made enemies of each other immediately. But over time, I think one of the best things I learned about asking questions, and I learned humility, and just accepting that I didn't understand what I was reading, and it was okay. I could just ask questions about the text instead of coming up with grand conclusions about how things should be, and so.
Most of my influences in writing came through music. I was really a child of punk rock and hip hop, and just basically enamored with rebellion and anger all the time. And so I was just one of those kids that I grew up in a single home and was looking for outlets and to identify with the frustration I was feeling, and I found it in music, and so I just started copying that style of lyrics, and then I found out that I actually liked writing poems and of course rhyme and rap, and then I moved into narrative and fiction from there. So I've been writing since I was about 8 or 9. And reading since then too. So.
And can you talk about how your writing has changed, maybe from when you first were inspired to pick up the pen and start writing and speaking, and then looking at how, maybe looking back at older pieces you've written, how you feel about that, and how your language has evolved?
I'm always looking for new forms to attempt. Recently, I participated at the De Young Museum for the Olmec exhibit, and I was asked to write a piece looking at the form of ancient Aztec writing, floricanto, and I studied the form. Okay, how did they write? A lot of it was they didn't use a lot of they would use a lot of metaphors that were similar, so they just kept doing kind of like saying one thing and continually finding similarities instead of contrasting, and a lot of repetition because the Aztec form was very based in oral. So the idea was to produce poems that people could remember, and that was really cool because they did it inside of the pieces. They would repeat lines multiply, and so I love repetition. That's really a big part of spoken word. The idea is for you to leave with something that I said in your mind, and the Aztecs already knew how to do that. So I've been working on just trying to. Then how do I turn an Aztec form into a hip hop poem? That's basically kind of my challenge. So I'm always looking for new forms, and that's something that, and also how to make nature relate to an urban audience in a non-hippie kind of whack way. You know what I mean?
I'm inspired by music, by chantings, by meditation, by breath. Also by poetry. I read a lot of poetry when I'm writing. I'm curious too about energy on language, and I feel as if everything matters when I start writing. I pull from all kinds of sources. Like nothing is left out. It is true that I feel as if sometimes I wish my work I wish I was more inventive, sort of formally in my work, but in fact, it is quite conventional, I have to say. And I'm always bothered by this because I feel like I'm always thinking these other things, but it never sort of materializes into the sort of formal structures. And I don't quite know what to make of that, but I am inspired. I think perhaps it works on language.
By the way, so awesome.
Patricia, thanks so much. Your voice is just mesmeric. It's beautiful. Thank you. And Paul, your energy was great. I don't know, could you just explain what Chicano means?
Sure. For the Chicano identity is something that emerged out of the 60s that was obviously identified with the Mexican-American struggle for self-determination. And the Chicano itself comes from, I guess, the Mexica, which were precursors to the Aztecs, who traveled, apparently according to the myth, who traveled from current-day Mexico City into what is called Aztlán, the southwest area, and established themselves there before they returned back down to Mexico. So the Chicano is kind of coming from that word Mexica, and the Chicano essentially refers to that experience, if you want to put it in a historical perspective, of the relationship of the Mexican struggle in the United States for self-determination, the relationship to the land and that connection to its legacy, what the land produces, and the defense of that land, the love for that land, the heritage and legacy of connection to that land. And so when I talk about Chicano, I don't necessarily refer to a specific political struggle. I think it's still going on. I think there's still use for the term Chicano, even though a lot of people think that's outdated. I always felt like I learned a lot from studying Chicano history, finding out, what's so important about Cesar Chavez, what's so important about Corky Gonzalez, what's so important about Dolores Huerta, why does it have anything to do with me? Well, without them, there's not a lot of third world studies. There wasn't a lot of affirmative action, which I got in on. UC San Diego, without their struggles, I don't have access to education, so I have to know what that is.
We're out of time, so thank you, Patricia and Paul.